Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I am so excited to be doing this video because I'm doing it in collaboration with Abby Williamson. I've been following Abby here on YouTube for probably 2 years, maybe a little bit more than that. And I really just have so much respect for her. I love her like no holds barred kind of attitude. I love that she's willing to call out bullshit when she sees it. She's hilarious, she's authentic, and I just have a ton of respect for her. And the fact that I'm doing this video in collaboration with her is just like ridiculously exciting for me. Like I'm having a little bit of a fangirl moment, which probably makes me seem like a huge nerd, but you know what? I'll wear the badge proudly. It is what it is. Anyways, what it is that we're doing is a tag video that was created by Samantha March and Allie Glines. I also saw Brit and Karen Harris do this in a recent live video, and I really liked the idea of it because it's looking at the palettes that you already own in your collection. I think a lot of videos look at what's coming up, new releases, what do you plan on buying, and don't get me wrong, I like those kind of videos as well, and I create those kind of videos. But there's something nice about just looking at your collection as a whole and really just putting your mind to what you already own. And so you're gonna see we have a number of categories here where we kind of look at what's your newest palette, what's the most expensive palette, the most colorful. You'll see as we go through the video. And it really makes you think about the palettes that you already own. And for me, I find that helpful because it helps me sort of put the finger in the dam of wanting to buy more. So having said that, I'm just going to ramble just a little bit longer just to say that in going through these categories, I tried really hard to narrow it down just to a single palette to answer each question. There's a couple where I have 2 palettes, but for the most part, I really did manage to just zero in on one. So having said that, the first question is, what is your newest palette? That's fairly easy because it just arrived in the mail yesterday. And it is this palette here from Artist Couture. It's the Supreme Nudes palette. I've only had an opportunity to play around with it once so far. Like I said, it just arrived yesterday. It is a basic bitch palette. As you can see, it is as basic as it gets. Like there's nothing fancy in here. It's not even like a pop of blue palette. It's just full on neutral. And I freaking love it. I don't know what it is, but the pictures of it, like this is just my speed lately, especially in like the world of staying at home. I have in recent days been going to my office in the mornings simply because working from home is just not working. There's only so many client phone calls that I can make where my kid is screaming in the background about shredded cheese. And it's just not workable anymore. So I do go to the office in the mornings, and on those days, this is the kind of eyeshadow look I'm going for. Just something where I don't have to put a ton of thought into it. I don't have to pair a bunch of colors. It just applies really quickly and really easily. And so this one fits the bill. I wore it earlier today. It's not what I'm wearing right now, but I did wear it this morning when I went into the office. And the application of what I did today was very easy. The mattes blended out beautifully. The shimmers are gorgeous. I am looking forward to playing around with this a lot more. I also really love the packaging on it. I love how minimalist it is. It's nice and sleek. There's really no wasted space in this palette. It does come with a mirror. I just haven't pulled the little thing off yet. It's just a really functional package, and I'm really happy with this purchase. Okay, so then the counterpoint question is, what is your oldest palette? It's not an exact science. I'm not entirely 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it's this one here. The Electric palette from Urban Decay. They don't even make this one anymore. That's how old it is. I mean, it's a classic. It's an oldie, it's a goldie. I don't use it very often, to be honest, but it's just one of those palettes that I can't bring myself to get rid of, if only for nostalgia's sake. So I really do think this is the oldest one in my collection, and I think it was like one of the very first sort of like high-end brands, like the Sephora palettes that I ever purchased. And I mean, I feel like almost everybody's owned this at some point. It's just such a fun palette. I would love to see them revamp this one and sort of like just tweak it a little bit and re-release that. I feel like Urban Decay is kind of stuck at this point, and they really just, if they're not going to come out with anything that's like super innovative and new, go back to what works, tweak it, update it, modernize it, re-release it. I would buy that in a heartbeat. Now we are on to price points. So 2 parts. What is your most expensive palette and what is your least expensive? So for most expensive, we've got Natasha Denona. This one is the gold palette. I also have the Sunrise palette. I don't know. It's the other one that's this size. One of them is the smaller, one of them is this size. Whatever the one that's this size is. However, I bought it when it was on sale. This one I did pay full price for. I think it was 160, 170 Canadian. That's a disgusting amount of money to pay on eyeshadow. It truly is. Do I like the palette? Absolutely. Is it worth $170? I don't think it is, to be honest. I mean, it's again, another neutral, boring palette, but it is beautiful. Like, it's beautiful. There are some really like unique little shades going on in here. I don't regret the purchase at all, but I don't feel compelled to like make it a collector's item where I like complete the set, you know what I mean, and buy all of the large Natasha Denona palettes. This one is good. The what the fuck is it? The Sunrise palette? I don't know. I could just go and look at it, but that's altogether too much work. Whatever the other one is, it's disappointing. This one is not. But therein lies the problem with Natasha Denona, is that it is very hit or miss. And when you're charging the amount of money that you're charging for these palettes in particular, wait for reviews. That's all I can say, because some of them are rather chalky and very disappointing. Some of them knock it out of the park. I would very much recommend waiting for reviews. So then again, on the other side, what is your least expensive? That's going to go to Wet n Wild, Walking on Eggshells. There it is. I think it might be about $4, maybe $5 at Walmart here in Canada. Again, a very neutral, staple kind of palette. Nothing fancy about it, but especially if you're just like starting out in makeup, or you just want almost like a your face but better. You know, if we can use that idea of like your lips but better kind of lipstick, this is like your eyelids but better kind of deal. This is a great option. You're not going to invest a ton of money. It's going to help you feel and look a little bit more put together and polished without being anything that you really need to think about at all. And the risk is incredibly low in terms of disappointment because you're not investing a lot of money in it. The next is, what is your everyday palette? There are a few that I rotate through rather heavily, but one that immediately comes to mind is a Natasha Denona Mini. Again, these can be hit or miss, but this one, so good. This one, and there's another one, the Mini Gold, so good. This one is the Mini Glam. You can see sort of the theme that's developing here is that I do tend to gravitate towards neutrals. If you'd asked me if I would ever do that a couple of years ago, I would have said, hell no. But here we are. I do enjoy colorful makeup, but on an everyday basis, this is what I'm looking for. I do, you know, when we're not locked in our houses, I do hold an office job. I am, I guess, by all standards, a professional, although I still don't really feel like an adult, despite the fact that my 40th birthday is in less than a month. So when I am going to the office, when I'm going to court, when I'm meeting with clients, all of that kind of thing, these are the kind of shades that I gravitate towards. I feel like they make me look quote unquote professional, but they're not distracting and I don't feel self-conscious in them. Typically speaking, I don't feel self-conscious in bright, bold, colorful shadows either, except if I'm sitting in front of a judge then yes, I'm going to feel self-conscious. So this is what I would consider to be an everyday palette. I can grab it. There's not a ton of shades to choose from. I don't get overwhelmed or stuck with a bunch of options. It's just easy peasy. There it is. So again, that one's the Natasha Denona Mini Glam. So to enter into the world of color, the next question is, what's your most colorful palette? Again, there is the Urban Decay Electric that I already showed, but the one that I thought I would use for this question is from Melt Cosmetics, and this is the Radioactive palette. And the reason I chose this one is simply because every color in the palette is bold. A lot of times you can find these colorful palettes that have some neutrals put in to balance everything out. There's not a neutral to be found in this palette. And this is one where I know some people have had some issues with the performance of it. I have not experienced that. I've had no issues with this one whatsoever. Even these really darker shades over here, I find that every shade in here works beautifully. This is what I consider to be more of like a companion kind of palette where I do bring in other shades just to sort of let one of these be the star of the show. But having said that, I have also used it just on its own and just gone sort of balls to the wall with color. So I think this is probably one of, if not the most colorful palette that I have. Now we are on to size. So we're going to start off with the smallest palette. And I wasn't quite sure what the intention of the question was. Was it smallest in terms of shade options or smallest in terms of actual physical size? So I brought two to share. So one is from Tarte. This is one of their foil finger paints in the shade Lunar. And there are only 3 pans in this palette. So I think this is probably the smallest palette that I own in terms of it just being a trio. And I have to say the reason I bought this palette, frankly, was for this silver because it's stunning. It is so gorgeous. I don't get on very well with this blue. This more taupey shade is also gorgeous. The blue is, it's not like a pressed, it's not a pressed glitter, but it's not nearly as smooth as the other two. There is more of like a glitter aspect to it, although it's not like pressed glitter in the sense of what you normally think of pressed glitters as. I don't really know how to explain it. It's a beautiful color. It's just I don't really like the texture of it all that much, and I don't find that it applies to the eyes very nicely, but these two save the palette for sure. If you are looking for a true silver, and if you can find this one on sale, go for it because this silver will not disappoint you. These are the kind of palettes that just like, they increase my irritation with Tarte because Tarte can knock it out of the park. They can deviate from, you know, boring sort of neutral shades. And I say boring facetiously because, as we've established, I love neutral shades. But they can do it, and they can do it well, but then they very often choose not to. And that just bothers me. Kind of chaps my ass a little. Anyways, moving on. In terms of the actual smallest, in terms of the physical size of the palette, it's this little guy here. This one is from Clé de Peau. It is, I don't even know. It's in the shade 315. This is just a refill, so I don't actually have the palette casing, I guess, that this would go into. I found this at Winners or Marshalls. I don't remember which one it was. I think it was Winners. And it was on sale for like 15 bucks or something like that. I have the feeling that if I bought this at like Nordstrom or Holt Renfrew or anything like that, it's going to run me like closer to 100, which very well could therefore make this ounce for ounce the most expensive palette that I have, except that I paid virtually nothing for it compared to what it would retail for at words. Anyways, the whole point of that is to say this is like physically the smallest palette that I own. So of course the natural follow-up question then is, what is the largest palette you own? And that's going to go to Glamlight right here. This is the paint palette. I honestly, I've never used it. I have finger swatched it, but I've never actually used it on my eyes, which just means that it's a colossal waste of money and also takes up a ton of space. So do I regret the purchase? A little bit. The shades are pretty. I have worked with their shadows before. I haven't really had issues with the shadows, and I will point out that even with these like more shimmery shades on the inner tract, there's none of that oil staining that I have in my pizza palette and the burger palette from Glamlight. So whether or not that means there's just not as much oil in this particular formula, or the packaging itself is a little bit more resistant to that kind of staining, I'm not sure, but I just thought I would note that because I know that I'm not the only one who has experienced that with their palettes. I don't know what it is that I haven't used this. I really don't. Honestly, I think it's the layout. My brain doesn't work this way. I am not creative enough to deal with this. Also, just the size of it, like just holding it's a pain in the ass, frankly. I mean, they've got this nice little like hole here so you can hold it like this, except that I'm right-handed, not left-handed, and if I hold it in my left hand, it's all like weird. And anyways, it was gimmicky. I shouldn't have bought it, but I did. And now it's the largest palette I have. And because I haven't used it, I keep holding on to it. So really what I need to do is just effing use it. And I think one way to help myself out is to do it as like a palette bingo kind of deal, where I just like randomly generate a look, like assign numbers to the shadows and then use like a number generator or whatever. And that would probably help me get stuck, or unstuck rather, because when I look at it, I'm like, I don't know what to do with you. So there's that. This is probably yet another one of like the more colorful palettes that I own. But I didn't want this one to be the most colorful because it does have like the brown and more of like a white kind of shade and all that kind of stuff. I wanted the Melt palette because it was all color. And because I can, it's my video. Anyways, moving on. The next question is, what is a palette with the best memory for you? And I have two of them for this question. So one of them I have talked about before. This is from Chantecaille. It is one of their hummingbird quads in Cool. There are the shades inside there. And like I said, I have talked about this before, and the reason why this holds such a special place in my heart is because it was gifted to me by a subscriber. And this is like probably the most generous gift I have ever received, and I don't take that lightly. I never have any expectations of this kind of thing. I truly don't. And for somebody to think of me, for somebody to put this kind of money out and send it to me, like, I'm so blown away by that, and I'm so grateful for that. And it's one of those palettes that I lusted over simply because it's so beautiful. And then the fact that the shadows themselves work so nicely, it's just like, this is one of those palettes that I can't imagine ever decluttering. And every time I look at it, I just think of how kind that particular subscriber is. I've talked to her before in direct messages, and she's not comfortable with me sharing her name until she says that I can. I'm not going to. I will respect that. But you know who you are, and I'm so incredibly grateful. I mean, she sent this to me months ago, and it's still just like, I usually keep it up behind me, and every time I see it, it just brings so much joy to my heart. Thank you. It means so much to me. So the memories attached to that are just very special to me. The second palette that I have that holds special memories for me is the Conspiracy palette. Yes, controversial, sure. I'm gonna move past that. So this was the collaboration between Shane Dawson and Jeffree Star. If you haven't seen the inside of it, there it is. This was the first like major PR I ever received, and it was so surreal. It was so exciting. I watched the series leading up to its release, and my face showed up in 2 of those episodes, and that like blew my mind. So this means something to me. Like, the fact that Shane Dawson saw something of mine, for the life of me, I don't know what he saw on my channel that like put me on his radar, but there we are. And not only saw it, but also, you know, basically gifted this entire collection to me, it was so surreal. It truly was. It was never anything that I ever expected, ever. So it's always going to hold a special place for me, simply because it came out of left field. Like, that's not something that happens for somebody with a channel my size, or for me even, like, channel size aside. Like, that's just, I never expected to be on somebody like that's radar. So that means a ton to me. So those are the two palettes that really do hold special memories for me and have a special place in my heart. Okay, so moving on, the next question is a palette that is worth the hype. And I couldn't narrow it down. So technically I have 3 palettes here, although it's 2 brands in specific that I want to talk about. So one is Midas Cosmetics. So I have the Smoky Glow and Midas Cosmetics collaboration palette here. And first of all, Hannah did an amazing job with this palette in terms of color selection and all that. I love working with this palette. The shadows themselves are beautiful. I have never tried anything else from Midas, but based on this palette alone, I want to. The mattes are smooth, they're pigmented, they blend beautifully, the shimmers are gorgeous, they're long lasting on my lids, they don't sort of just crease up into nothing, they don't just disappear throughout the course of the day. I just really enjoy working with this palette, and I really want to try more from Midas. The other brand that I want to talk about is Kaleidos. So I have 2 other palettes here. This one is the Cyber Bronze. So there are the shadows inside. And then the one that I'm wearing on my eyes today is the Sci-Fi Green palette, which kind of brings to mind the Gemini palette from Melt. And these shadows, again, are a dream to work with. Like, this black is insanely pigmented. Like, you saw how, like, it was just one of those. Like, it's insanely pigmented, and yet it's still workable. Sometimes you get these super pigmented black shadows and they just, like, sit there and they're not going to budge. They're not moving anywhere. This one, you can blend, no problem. Work in small doses. Like, don't load up your brush and then go to town, or else you're going to have a hot mess. But it's not a stiff shadow to work with. The mattes are beautiful, and the shimmers are gorgeous as well. So this is a brand that I don't hear like big YouTubers talking about. Do hear a lot of smaller channels talking about it, and I really think that this is a brand that deserves far more hype because their palettes, beautiful. Like, the shadows are just gorgeous to work with. On the flip side, the question is, what is a palette that's not worth the hype? And I do have one to talk about, and it's this one here. This is the Textured Neutral Volume 1 from Tati. Okay, so I've done a dedicated review on this palette. I've talked about this one before. I love the layout of it. I love it. Where the paint palette just like makes me a little twitchy, this one I love. I love, like, you got your color stories all in a row, you've got your finishes all in a row. It's like a nice little spectrum here. Like, I can deal with this. I like this. However, shadows aren't fantastic. This is one of those palettes that I would not say is beginner friendly, simply because you're going to get super frustrated and you're going to give up on it because it takes a lot of work. And there's a lot of like technique that goes into it, I find as well. Like, particularly this row right across here, second from the bottom, this is the sequin finish, I guess. So like, this is the shadow that I always pick on right here because it's beautiful in the pan. This nice like orangey with the gold flecks in it. It's gorgeous in the pan. If you just pick it up with a brush and swipe it over your lid, all those gold flecks disappear. And then you're left with a relatively pretty matte orange, but you already have that down here. What makes this like shadow so pretty in the pan is the gold reflect in it, and it disappears. So you really have to like pat it on and really work with it. And so this isn't one of these palettes, despite the color story, it's not a palette that I find I can just like pick up, throw it on, and out the door I go. I really have to like devote the time to make the palette work for me. And I'm too lazy for that, frankly. And then the pressed glitters are just like unnecessary. We didn't need pressed glitters. The metallic shades leave me wanting more. And if you're gonna have an entire row and you're gonna label it metallic, make it metallic. Make it as metallic as you can. And so I just find that overall, it requires a lot of effort. And at the end of the day, the reward for that effort is not as great as I would want it to be. The next question is, what is a favorite palette from a favorite brand? And so I really did look at all of my palettes and really tried to figure out, like, what is a favorite brand of mine? What do I think is very consistent across the board? What is a brand that I'm always curious as to what their next release is going to be? All those kind of like factors went into it. And the one that I came up with is ABH. Now, note ABH, not the Norvina line. I'm not subscribed to this whole Norvina Giant Pro palette thing. I'm just not. But ABH, and this one, this is a palette that should have been permanent. There's no reason why this should have been a limited edition release. Again, you can see where my true nature lies in these neutral palettes, with the exception of this pink, which honestly, when I first saw pictures of this, I thought that pink was like, why the hell are you in here? But it actually works. It really works with the undertones of some of these other shadows that are in here. Again, you've got super foiled metallic shadows. You've got mattes that blend out beautifully. Again, a palette where you can actually get quite a few diverse looks with this, but also you don't have to spend a ton of time thinking about it, and you don't have to spend a ton of time creating the look like you do with the Tati palette. So this is one that I wish they would bring back as a permanent. Like, I don't know why they would ever consider this to be limited edition, especially when it's such a staple color story. Like, it makes no sense that this was limited edition, but this is a favorite palette of mine and I absolutely adore it. So now we're on to what is your most used palette? And my interpretation of that is, which is the palette that shows the most signs of use? And for me, that is the Tartelette in Bloom, because I have hit pan on quite a few of the shades in here. This is a palette that in 2019 I did try to do a pan that palette project, and that's how I managed to get pan in these shades over here. And then continuing to work with it, you can see a little bit showing in this row here. I do not like these two shades at all and just never use them. But again, this is one of those like super user-friendly palettes. Like, you just kind of go across the row and your look is already there. But if you want to like mix and match and move across the palette, you can do that easily as well. And all of the shades are going to play nicely with each other. This is one that I get a ton of use out of, obviously. And even when I'm not using the palette on its own to create a look, I'm just using a shadow here and there to build with something else, this is the one that I reach for. It just, any sort of undertone that I'm looking for, it has the blending shade for that. All right, and the last question is, what is the most underrated palette in your collection? And while I don't really know if it's necessarily underrated, it's a palette that I haven't heard anybody talk about, and it's from Milani. This is the Gilded Gold palette. Again, neutral, this time with a pop of teal, I guess. But it's a fantastic drugstore option. I have not had any issues working with this palette. I love that it has not quite a duochrome, but it's got like this nice metallic shade here. The really deep, dark teal is freaking beautifully pigmented, like absolutely beautiful. The metallic shades are metallic, and again, they last nicely on my eyes. So there's just a selection of them there. And if I swatch them out, you can see them even better. It's just, I don't know why nobody's talking about this palette. I really don't. Again, drugstore option. Nice pigmentation, nice reflective shine on those foiled shadows. it's a staple palette from the drugstore, if you ask me. I find that a lot of drugstore palettes can be disappointing, to be honest. This one, not so much. And I know they have a few in this line of like the gilded, I think there's a gilded noir, there's a pastel one. I don't have any of those. But this one is fantastic. And again, staple sort of color story here. In terms of the actual performance, it's a really good palette. And not just really good because it's drugstore, but it's a really good palette. Full stop. Now granted, the price point for the drugstore on this one is still pretty high. Like this will run you about, I think, $25 Canadian here at like Shoppers Drug Mart. But it's still a far cry from say like $55 for ABH. So if you're in the market and you don't want to spend a ton of money, I would recommend looking at some of these Milani palettes. They also have smaller palettes, which are also quite nice. Not necessarily as nice as this one, but still good quality. So there's that one. And that brings us to the end of the eyeshadow palette tag. These are the kind of tags though that as I sit down to edit or if I re-watch my video, I'll remember other palettes and I'll be like, oh, that's the one that I should have included here. But be that as it may, I'm gonna leave it alone with what we've just talked about. So I want to thank Abby for agreeing to do this tag with me. I think that's just so exciting. As I said at the beginning, I don't want to geek out too much about it. Be sure to go and check her video out. She's going to be linked in the description box down below. Please tell her that I said hi. I'm not going to specifically tag anybody to do this, but if you do create this tag on your channel, feel free to let me know down below. I'd love to go check it out. Or if you don't have a channel but want to answer some of these questions and just throw them in the comments down below, that is cool as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to watch, and I will see you in my next video. Until then, just be a decent human being. Bye for now. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Don't know what I was gonna say. Alright, we're off to a fucking stellar start. Possibly English. It is just, it's something I haven't, oh my god, I'm so tired. What I settled on is the Golden Guild, What? No. Because